So what are vocational training programs? Vocational training programs are those that kind of impact hands-on training, skills training that are readily marketable. Okay? And it's increasingly becoming common in many parts of the world, and it's become a policy of choice to provide skills to the large number of people who are seem to be entering the job market every year without the necessary skills, and also to reskill the population who have different kind of skills, who have been in workforce for a while, but then because of the global financial crisis or global or structural adjustments are somehow or the other finding themselves out of work. So it's policymakers have been talking about this as an important tool in the whole process. Now, there is quite a bit of evidence on this from developed countries, but unfortunately the evidence is not very encouraging, and the effects are found to be small, they're not particularly cost effective, very heterogeneous, and so on. However, that does not necessarily mean that it's not going to be useful, not going to be a useful policy tool in the context of developing countries. Because in the developing countries, typically people are starting from a lower end of the production function, so the effects of additional skills is likely to be much higher. So what we are doing in this paper is, we are looking at essentially a simple question: can short-run skill-based training programs improve labor market outcomes for those who can no longer go back to school, or those who are who have kind of finished school and don't have the necessary skills in the labor market? This is specifically in the context of India. So what is the evidence from developing countries? There's some evidence from developing countries, mostly from Latin American countries and African countries, and the effects are, while still pretty heterogeneous, the effects are kind of stronger than what we have seen in the context of developed countries. But the one thing that we noticed when we're doing it is that there's pretty much no work on Asia, no work on India, on the issue of vocational training. Now some skills training program done by David McKenzie and others in Jordan and so on, but in general that Jordan is not really a developing country, it's kind of a middle income country. So in Asia this is as much of a problem, so there's virtually no work on India. So what we do is we look at a very specific vocational training program, and we'll talk about it. It was done in conjunction with 2 NGOs in Delhi. The program is very specific. It provided training, a 6-month training, subsidized, virtually free training in stitching and tailoring to women living in 2 slum areas, South Shadra and North Shadra in Delhi. It was implemented in Delhi, and what we have is a pre-training data and 2 rounds of post-training data that we will use to analyze the 6-month effect, or what short-run effect. I don't know what, whether you call the 6-month a short-run effect or what, but I'll call it a 6-month effect and an 18-month program effect. So that's what we want to do. A little bit about the Indian context here. Don't need to talk about this in this audience. Very high growth rates over the last 2 decades. However, it has also been associated with rising levels of inequality, and it's pretty much accepted that over the last 20 years inequality has gone up. So why has inequality gone up despite these high growth rates? And one explanation is that there is a skill shortage, which basically prevents individuals from certain groups of the population, certain classes, to really take full advantage of the opportunities that are being created because of through this growth process. There's the popular press has been talking about it quite a bit. Almost every second issue of The Economist has an article on skills shortage in India and what's happening in India. So this is the one from 2013 May, and they specifically say that a lot of training is required. Many of India's young leave school ill-prepared for even rudimentary jobs. So it's a part of the series of articles which I've been talking about on this issue essentially. The Age, which is a major newspaper in Melbourne where I am based, they had this article on similar issue, and they said that in India, September 11, millions of people are unable to find a job while employers struggle to find qualified candidates, and they continue on to say that what the government failed to realize years ago was that to secure jobs and become productive, young Indians need both education and vocational skills. So it's there in policy circles, and I'll come to that in a minute, the popular press, in the public perception, public arena, it's kind of now, again, people are increasingly thinking of this as a policy of choice. And what everybody seems to be agreeing is that it is going to, if not is already has, going to lead to a major constraint to the growth process of the country. Not that the policymakers in India are not talking about it, not thinking about it, and indeed the National Skills Development Corporation set up by the government of India has been given has the agenda of creating 150 million jobs over the next several years and so on. So this is a poster from some government department. I can't remember which one it was, but essentially about getting skilled and becoming independent. You can set up your own firm, get self-employment, and so on. So what we plan to do, what we want to do in this paper is investigate this whole issue in a somewhat more systematic manner. To do that, we look at, as I said, a subsidized 6-month-long training program in stitching and tailoring, and it was offered in conjunction with 2 NGOs. One is Pratham, and in the development audience, nobody needs to know, I don't need to talk about Pratham. They're one of the biggest NGOs in the world. They've done so much of work on preschool education, and in a sense, this came out of conversations with Pratham people in Delhi, their Delhi office, and they said, they have been doing so much of work on for the children, and one of the things that they've been talking about, at least privately, is that want to move towards skills accumulation for the mothers. So this was kind of the population that they were interested in. And the second was a small NGO called Satya, who have been providing skills training to the population, to women, to low-income women in Delhi for quite a few years. It's a much smaller NGO than Pratham. It's much less known also. So who were the women? Who was the sample population? This is women aged 18 to 39. They had 5 or more years of completed schooling, and this was a requirement kind of imposed on us by both Pratham and Satya. The argument was, look, without some basic education, it's very difficult for them to really internalize anything that happens as a part of the program. And they must be resident of specific disadvantaged areas, slums or resettlement colonies of New Delhi, the South Shadra and North Shadra, both on the other side of the Yamuna. Okay, so it was widely advertised to the eligible population. So this is the English version of the advertisement. This is the English version of the advertisement, pretty much talked about all of the requirements, talked about what was the program about, who was eligible, what was the cost, and what was the duration, the training timing, 2 hours a week, etc., etc. And they had kind of everything was distributed to all potentially eligible women in this area. Okay, so the time commitment, and that all this information was included in the advertisement. The time commitment was 2 hours a day, 5 days a week over a 6-month period. The third was this deposit. So every participant, everyone who was selected to receive the training had to provide 50 rupees a month deposit fee. That's 300 rupees over the 6-month period, with a promise that they would get 350 rupees back if they completed the program. Completed the program meant that they completed over 6 months, got a certificate at the end of the 6 months. So if they completed it, got the certificate, they would get 350 rupees back. We received 658 applications, 244 from South Shadra, 404 from North, and North Shadra is a much bigger area, and we had, for example, 2 training centers in South Shadra and 3 training centers in North Shadra. Yep.
Is that something that should appear to us to be high demand or low demand?
This was about 9% of the population. So I don't, 9% of the eligible population. I don't know what, whether it's a high demand or low demand, I don't know. But we did, a lot of people said that they would, there were constraints, and we're going to talk about constraints in terms of why they didn't apply. And we have a kind of a sister paper in terms of looking at who applied for the program and who didn't. And we do find there's some interesting behavioral or intrinsic characteristics do have an effect on who applies for these programs, because people who apply for the programs have the want to set up a small business. So you kind of select a very specific kind of women who want to apply for these programs. So high demand, low demand, I don't really know how to answer that.
The number of places that are available.
Yeah, so we didn't have we didn't want to go, we kind of self-sponsored. Not, this was kind of, we didn't have to turn anyone back, but we wouldn't have liked to have gone much more than this because of budget constraints and so on. So as I said, it's almost like a pilot program, so you want to see whether it works or not. And so 2/3 from each area were randomly assigned to the treatment group. So this was the chronology of events. So we had the advertising in May, June 2010, the application and randomization in July, the baseline survey in July 2010, then those in the treatment group received the 6-month training between August 2010 and January 2011. Those in the control group didn't receive any training. The first follow-up survey was 6 months after the training program ended in July, August 2011, and the second follow-up was 12 months after that in 2012. So that's 18 months after the program ended. Okay, some attrition. The first thing was that while 658 women applied for the program, there were 64 women who just refused to even participate in the baseline survey. So they, and because of ethics requirements and IRB requirements or human ethics requirements, we just really couldn't pursue them anymore. So those 64 women are not in any of our analysis. The first year we had 594 women on whom we have the baseline data, the random, in the treatment group or the control group. Then we had a 210 out of the 594, 504 were surveyed over the 2 years, 2010 and 2011. When we went back in 2012, we had 491 women who could be surveyed both in 2010 and 2011. So some women who were not in the survey in 2011 could be resurveyed in 2012. But for most of our analysis, we use this sample of women who could be surveyed in all 3 rounds. We've done some analysis using these separate subsamples, and the results essentially remain the same. So I'm going to focus in our presentation on results using this particular sample. So what we are going to do is first, when we compare the pre-program to the first follow-up to get the 6-month effect of the program, the pre-program to the second follow-up to get the 18-month effect of the program. So that's the basic idea. This is the basic empirical specification, and we are interested. So this is going to be the short, this is the pool data. So this is going to be the 6-month intent to treat effect of the program. This is the additional effect of the next 12 months. And so the median 18-month intent to treat effect is going to be given by beta 2 plus beta 4. So that's the 18-month effect of the program. So this is some sample balance at the baseline. These were some of the outcome variables, whether they were employed in casual or permanent employment, self-employment, any employment, hours worked in the last week, monthly earnings in the last month. Pretty low participation at the baseline amongst these women, very low participation in the labor market at the baseline. But the thing is, there's no stars in the last column at the baseline. We also have data on ownership of sewing machine, which we use as a measure of entrepreneurship, given this is, after all, sewing and stitching and tailoring, and the women want to set up their own business. The main asset they need is essentially a sewing machine. Here there is a star, so it seems as if the women in the control group are more likely to own a sewing machine at the baseline than women in the treatment group, and we really don't have any answer as to why this is the case. Roscoe participation, happiness at home. Roscoe participation we use as a measure of empowerment. Happiness at home, some satisfaction as a result, gained as a result of exposure to this program. Again, no difference at the baseline. Okay. In terms of the socioeconomic characteristics that we ultimately use in our regressions, age, completed secondary schooling, experience in stitching and tailoring, it was self-reported. In retrospect, we should have done some kind of a test to know their baseline ability, which we didn't. Marital status, their caste, their religion, and the dependency ratio, there are no stars. Nothing. It's balanced at the baseline. Okay. A few more things, because there's some attrition in the sample, we want to look at the likelihood of attrition, and this is the results from a probate regression where we have the assignment to the treatment as one of the variables and the other socioeconomic characteristics, and most importantly, assignment to treatment is not significantly affecting the likelihood of attriting. So this is your this variable takes 0 if the woman is included in all 3 surveys and 1 otherwise. The other thing, what about differential attrition? Should we be worrying about it? We do this interaction test where we regress the outcome variables of interest at the baseline on baseline observables, an attrition dummy, a treatment dummy, and a full set of interaction terms. And we look at the F statistical joint significance of the attrition dummy and all its interaction terms. It's a standard test, and the p-values is always greater than 0.1. So attrition doesn't appear to be that big a problem in this case. So the first thing is the labor market outcomes. So this is the 6-month effect, 18-month effect. From all of these, there is a positive effect. Bearing in mind that the baseline effects are, at the baseline, very few women are in the job, in the labor market. And both in 2011 and in 2012, the controlled women are also, not, there's no huge jump in the proportion of the controlled women in the labor market. That said, the treatment effects are strong. So there's pretty, large treatment effects, conditioning on the small sample, small participation rate. Okay, so all of them intent to treat effects are strong. About on entrepreneurship, empowerment, and life satisfaction. For ROSCA and happiness at home, empowerment and mental satisfaction, there's no program effect at all. What we find in terms of entrepreneurship, defined by the ownership of sewing machine, there's no effect in the 6-month, but there's an increased effect in the medium run or over the 18-month period. So they're more likely to buy own a sewing machine 18 months post-survey. Okay, and we do so that's the basic results, and we do it for different subsamples. So this is effects on the labor markets, effects on entrepreneurship, no effects on empowerment or mental satisfaction. We use a set of index measures, similar results. We do it for the different subsamples, as I said, again, very similar results across, irrespective whether you do for the full sample, all women who could be surveyed in all 3 rounds, or the other 2 samples, and essentially the same results. So that's the main result. There's some effect, and the takeaway message there is that there's some effect of the program. The offering of the women who were offered the program do much better, both in the very short run and the so-called medium run. Okay, yeah.
Do you have a count on savings or consumption?
We didn't collect any data on savings. We have some data on wealth, household wealth. We have data on we don't get anything much. We have data on whether you have a savings bank account, how much do you place, how much do you place on average in the last 6 months, every month in the savings account. We can look at it. We don't find, in some of the versions we had those results, but we don't find anything much on that. We didn't collect any consumption data, so it just goes crazy if you had a consumption module. So, and we don't have data on health, unfortunately. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about barriers to program completion and attendance. The first thing is about attendance. So this is the average attendance over a month for those who completed the program. Remember, those who completed the program are those who attended for 6 months and got a certificate at the end. So those who completed, on an average, attended about 70% of classes, slightly lower in November because of Diwali, but on average about 70%. Those who did not complete the program dropped off right at the beginning, all the way in August itself. It goes down to below 20%, and it's pretty low all through. So difference in attendance rates for those who completed and not. And we also asked, why did they drop? So this is for those who were offered the program. So this graph is restricted to those who were offered the program. About 55% actually completed the program. So we asked them, why did they drop out? Because we were interested in what are the barriers to this. These kind of programs are important. Policymakers are talking about these programs, and there you are being offered yes, there is an opportunity cost of time, but then it's virtually free. but you're dropping out. So why is it that you're dropping out? So and they talked of various reasons. One is very time consuming, which is very true. 2 hours a week, 5 days a week, 6 months. It is a lot of time. Sickness, childcare options were unavailable. That's important because anecdotally, a lot of, and we'll see later that married and mother-in-law present in the household does have an effect, increased likelihood of program completion. And anecdotally, this was important because a lot of women actually brought their toddlers in the first month with them for the program, and the toddlers apparently created chaos. And the other women in the class complained, said, look, we are here to learn. We don't want this complete chaos going around. So the women with children often had to drop out because they didn't, and specifically those who did not have any proper childcare arrangements at home. Family members are not happy or did not give permission, sickness of other members of family. And the other thing that we found was that there was a big drop depending on the time to walk to the training center. So they were offered they were said that, look, here are the options. You choose your time. You choose which training center you want to be enrolled in because how long it will take, whether you're more comfortable walking to training center A or B and so on. So they're given choice of the time if they chose the afternoon session and suddenly they found that, look, this is not going to work, I might choose the morning session. They had the option of changing. But they did all that, but still we had a huge drop in as the walking time to training center increased from 0 to 30, a big drop in the participation rate. And this was computed we couldn't do Google Maps, so we basically got one of the Pratham employees to walk from each person's house to the training center this woman was enrolled in, was attending. So that's how we got. So this I think, in a sense, bothers me quite a bit, this graph. This is 30-minute walk, but even then they are dropping out so much. And it talks a lot, it says a lot about the importance of local access, in a sense, because there are programs that are coming up, mainly government, some may be private, but they are not going to be as localized. Right? So and if it's not as localized, women are not going to be taking the bus, traveling outside their neighborhood. They don't even want to walk for 30 minutes. And given what we know about safety of women in Delhi, it is a serious issue possibly. So then what we did was we looked at the determinants of program completion. Yeah.
Sorry, all of these women have given the 300 rupees.
No, so they might have dropped out. So if they have not, if they've dropped out at the end of the first month. No, it's every month.
Oh.
So every month they had to give 50 rupees. The first day or the second day of the month, they had to bring the 50 rupees. So it is not a 300 rupee one-time deposit. So it was a 50 rupee per month. Because the NGOs felt that, look, asking them to get 300 in one shot might be hard. So let's ask them to get 50 rupees a month. And if you do it for 6 months, at the end of, with your certificate, you get 350 rupees back. Oh, it's a huge increase in income. So it's about 150%. But starting from baseline, a lot of zeros in that. But even then, there's a huge increase in income. Tarun? Yeah, we're going to come to that. Just hold on. So this is about training program completion. So distance to training center is negative and significant. This is the completion of the Satyapratan program. And then in the second round, we also asked, did you complete any program? Not just the Satyapratan program, any program offered by any organization. Because between 2010 and 2012, 2011, this had become more and more important, more of an important issue. And so here, of course, we don't have the distance to the training center. We asked them, but it's not very good data. But then assignment to training, to the Satyapratan training program is strongly correlated with the likelihood of completing any program. And here is this mother-in-law effect. Marriage, if a woman is married and has a mother-in-law at household, is much more likely to complete a program. It's it's positive here, it's not statistically significant for the completion of the Satyapratham program. Okay, so this is the TOT estimates using initial assignment treatment, interaction with age and year as the instruments, and results are stronger, of course, because but all in the same direction. So a lot of stars both in the 6-month and the 18 months for the Satyapratham program, and this is for any program. Okay, so there is an effect on labor market participation, on incomes, on entrepreneurship. The next question, though, is it, what are the intermediate steps? Is it really skill accumulation? This is a program of skill accumulation, but is it, skill accumulation, or are there these intermediate channels which possibly could be driving these results? So the ITT captures total impact of having access to this program, but what about intermediate channels? Is it only with skills? So what there could be a number of different pathways. What we do is we look at 2 alternatives. As I said, this is just 2. You could think of many more, I'm sure. But we look at whether there are changes in the intrinsic characteristics of these women. For example, women who are in these training programs, that they meet others, first time they've been outside of their homes, and in this kind of an environment, they're learning, they're gaining some knowledge. Maybe they've become more self-confident. Maybe they have become more competitive because they're interacting with other women. So maybe that is what is driving the increased labor market participation and so on. Or is it this kind of a certificate effect? Certificate is a piece of paper. They get it at the end of the year, end of the program. It's a piece of paper signed off by the NGOs, Pratham and Satya, and maybe the fact it's a valuable piece of paper. So maybe that is not the skills per se is what is driving. They can take this certificate to somebody and show that, look, I've got this training, so I want to do this or something. So what we do is first thing we do is try to see whether what are the behavioral impacts of this program. Want to look at, is there changes in competitiveness in terms of risk, changes in risk tolerance, in confidence. To do that, we conduct a set of artifactual field experiments. We get women to participate in a set of these artifactual field experiments, both pre and post-training. The pre-training ones were done before randomization, and before they knew their treatment status. The post-training was 5 months after the training was completed, and because of operational reasons, we could only do it for a smaller sample. So a randomly selected sample of applicants from South Shahadra to participate in these programs, in these experiments. Okay, so what we do is we look at specifically the attitudes toward risk and their competitiveness. So the first thing is we ask them to participate in something called an investment game, very simple game. And the second one is we look at their competitiveness, competitive behavior, and through that we also try and get an idea of their confidence and therefore the change in confidence. So the investment game, very simple. Each participant is allotted 50 rupees, and we told them, look, you can allocate any proportion of this 50 rupees, any X, to a risky asset or to a safe asset. Whatever X you allocate to a risky asset will give you a return 4X with probability 0.5 and 0 with probability 0.5. Retain any amount 50 minus X, and that gives you a return of 1. So their choice of X is essentially a measure of their risk tolerance, and we see whether there's a change in this choice of X between pre-training and post-training. So that kind of tells us if there is a change in their risk tolerance over the period of time, as a result of this experiment, of this program. The real effort task, the competition game was through a real effort task. They had to fill in Ziploc bags with kidney beans or rajma in 1 minute. So they were given, they were told what does a properly filled bag of rajma mean. So they were given some rajma in a bucket and given some Ziploc bags and said, okay, you have 1 minute, fill these bags up with rajma. But before the task and after they were told, the instructions read out and were told what exactly is a filled up bag and so on, they had to choose how they wanted to get paid. They had to choose either a piece rate where their income would depend solely on their own performance. They would get 4 rupees for each correctly filled bag. Or they could choose a competition rate. So the way they said, okay, their income would depend on how she performs relative to a randomly chosen person in the same session. So we calculated their bags, and then from a list they had to from a box they had to randomly draw draw one chit, and they were matched with that person on that chit. If this woman had filled in more bags than her randomly matched participant, you would get 16 rupees per bag full and 0 otherwise. Okay? So this, and now large part of the behavioral literature has talked about this as a measure of competitiveness, because this is done before the actual the task. So it's a measure of their competitiveness. We also asked them some questions prior to the task. For example, we asked them what, the self-assessment of the number of bags they want. How many bags do you think you can fill? That's a measure of their absolute confidence. Or they asked, what do you think your relative rank is going to be in this group? You see all these women. Where do you think you stand? So we use as a measure of their relative rank within the group. So this is, as I said, it's done for a much smaller subsample. It's randomly drawn subset from that from South Shadra, applicants from South Shadra. Some difference at the baseline in terms of confidence. Women in the relative rank, relative confidence. Women in the treatment group seem to be more confident of the relative ability than the women in the control group. But otherwise, in terms of risk tolerance, in terms of competitiveness, in terms of self-assessment of their ability, no difference. No difference in terms of the socioeconomic characteristics, excepting for the marital status. Okay, so the effect of training on these intrinsic characteristics, nothing, no effect. So there's no change in these behavioral, on their intrinsic characteristics as a result of being offered this training program. So we argue that, look, it's not as if women have become more competitive, women have become more tolerant towards risk, women have become more confident, and therefore they're doing things which is affecting their income, their labor market participation. So whatever the effects is not being driven by changes in these intrinsic characteristics. So that's the first thing. Next, how am I doing with respect to time? Okay.
In the self-assessed evaluation, the women were saying that they estimate that they would make 4.4 bags, right? Which would give them more than 16 rupees.
Come again? Can you?
Like, if you go back,
yeah.
Like here, self-assessment for full sample 4.4, that means, am I right in saying that on average the women think that they will fill 4.4 bags?
Yeah.
So that means that on average they would get more than 16 rupees on the standard scheme. So why would they want to go to the competitive scheme?
Because I think because it's they're not sure, how many others would.
Yeah, but on the non-risky scheme they would get more than 16.
Yes, but then even if they filled in say 5 bags, they might be matched with somebody who is filling up 6 bags, let's say, and then in that case they would get 0, right, in the competitive scheme.
They have no reason to go to the risky scheme.
Yes, so they don't. They have, some of them still do. Maybe the ones who think that they're really going to be good, they do. So we have quite a bit of variation in the set of people, women who choose the competitive scheme as opposed to the piece rate scheme. So what you are saying is that because they are choosing 4 bags, they say that on average they will choose.
I'm saying that on average, is that word? They should not be choosing the risky scheme because on the piece rate they would get more than the risky scheme.
Not necessarily. No. No, they won't. No, they won't. Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. Right? They would choose. It could go both ways, right? It could go both ways. So, see, in the risky scheme, in the competitive scheme, if they suppose they completed four bags, and that 4 bags was more than the bags that they're randomly matched parts. So then they would get 16 times 4.
But the other scheme is you get a 4 rupees per bag.
In the other, they would get 0 in the other case, right? In the competitive case, if they did less than the other.
But they have no reason to choose the competitive one, given that on the non-competitive one they got 4 times 4.4.
But then they could have got 4 times 16, right?
Yeah. It's per bag.
Yeah, per bag. Per bag.
Per bag.
Per bag.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Per bag. I was not, sorry, if I was not very clear. It's per bag.
Okay, so sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a question about the job search process.
Yeah.
Do these women go out in the market and find jobs on their own, or does the NGO help them with placement?
So the NGO did not help them with any placement. So we thought a lot as to whether we would give some, we have a orthogonal treatment where the NGO provided some assistance or not, but we don't have enough power. So what we have done, and I don't have the results here, we are in the process of looking through the data, is to see what they have they been doing, at least for the women who are working. What did they do? How did they get their job? And if they didn't get a job, what have they been doing with this training? Have they, what women have been saying is that, okay, we are not really working yet, but what we are doing is we are doing all our stitching and tailoring at home. So they're saving in that sense. They're doing stitching and tailoring for the family members, for friends, and so on. And the other thing that what a lot of these women want to get a foothold on is this subcontracting market. So these big garment manufacturers in Delhi now contract their manufacturing process to bigger, bigger firms who do that, and they in turn subcontract it to these women, to a lot of others. And a lot of these women say we want to get, we want to be somehow associated with that that chain.
So the related question is, did the program include imparting soft skills, awareness of the market and rights?
No, we didn't do any of those. I agree, very important, but we stuck to just the training program. Okay, yeah.
So was the impact larger on those women who had a stitching machine to begin with? Looking at the a little bit of the channels, because 50% had a sewing machine to begin with, so
Yeah.
it's not like they were new to stitching.
Yes, and I don't, because I can't remember, we have done it in some, but then since we didn't stratify it, randomize it on the basis of the ownership of sewing machine, so we can't say anything causal. But then I don't think there was a big difference in terms of ownership of sewing machine at the baseline and their outcome measures at the as a result of the program. So I don't think so. Having a sewing machine at home, their mother could have been using it, their grandmother could have been using it. They might not really know much about sewing. So. That's the other thing that we are trying to find out. We have some data in what sector they are trying to find employment. We haven't, we are in the, if I might talk to you in 2 weeks and give you an answer to this. So hopefully we'll be able to find out that in very shortly. The last thing is the certificate effect. So is it because of the program effects indeed the result of skill accumulation, or is it because of program completers offered a certificate? So we look at use the variation of in attendance rate, monthly attendance rate, number of months attended, and one would think higher attendance means more intensive skill accumulation, greater intensity of training. So if this attendance has no effect, then we can argue that it is a certificate effect, it's this piece of paper. And we don't find that. When we look at it's essentially being driven by attendance. The skill, the intensity of training does have a big impact on, both in the short run, in the 6 month, and in the 18 months. And same thing and results are very similar. Same thing on the ownership of sewing machine in the 18 run. So we say that look, the piece of paper is important, possibly. It maybe gives them a entry at the door, but then it's not just the piece of paper. The skill accumulation is important, is an important part. So as I said, there could be many other reasons, but we have at least been able to say that it's not because of changes in intrinsic characteristics, not because of this piece of paper effect, the certificate effect, the sheepskin effect. Okay. Some back of the envelope calculations, Tarun. The cost, including fixed and variable cost, is about 1,810 rupees per person. It's a pretty cheap program, I don't know. I can't tell you offhand. I can't tell you. I can find out. We have the numbers. I can't tell you offhand. With discounted, if you work in life for 40 years with using the ITT estimates, maybe it's an underestimate. A discount rate of 5%. the cost recovery is happening in 2 years. It's likely to be an underestimate. But the main question, and we don't have an answer to this, is that, is it that people don't have knowledge of this kind of returns in the labor market? So why is it that they are not enrolling in labor markets, or why is it that the other organizations are not providing? Maybe it's to do with this, distance. Maybe it's to do with access. It's to do with things like program completion that's affecting their not participating in such programs. Okay, so let me finish in the last 5 minutes. Very little is known, at least in the context of Asia and India, how to help women in low-income households to acquire skills, find jobs, increase self-employment. We have seen that large effects, okay, program benefits outweigh cost. Both the ITT and the TOT effects are important. And how do they compare to alternative schemes like microcredit? After all, the microcredit revolution was based on this, or capital injection. Microcredit, the effects are small, heterogeneous, and increasingly questionable. Capital injection, people have found that the effects are strong, the whole David McKenzie work in Sri Lanka, but then there is a very gender bias. This big effects of capital injection on men, almost no effect on women. Okay, and they argue in terms of bargaining power. Cash injections directed at women could be confiscated by their households, by their husbands, leading to considerable inefficiencies. And we argue that, look, this is a human capital specific to the women. It has the potential, it appears to be effective. But, this is kind of the first step, kind of a pilot program, and many more issues to be examined. As I said, access, barriers to program completion, lack of information. Why is it ultimately that other organizations are not starting these kind of programs, these kind of schemes, when the returns are pretty high? People should, in principle, be willing to pay more. Maybe it is just they don't have information about these kind of programs. But the first step in our mind is to kind of estimate what are the potential returns to enrolling and in this kind of programs and receiving this kind of trainings. So many things left for future research, but in the context of this paper, there's positive effects of attending a training program like this. Yes, Graham.
There is probably a generic review on the effect as well going on. Like you're training essentially a lot of women leaving a 5-minute walk from the training center to stitch and tailor. So have you have any information on what happens on the price of those services in those areas, and whether women that were providing those services but not attending this vocational training are being negatively affected by those?
You're talking about the general equilibrium effects? Yeah. See, this is such a small program. We don't think this program per se is going to have a big general equilibrium effects. But if you roll out a program like this on a really large scale, I don't know. So what else? How else? So
even here, like, because all those women are in a 5-minute walk of the training center.
Yeah.
I agree that you will not change the prices in Delhi, but in this area you would certainly increase very much the competition in tailoring and stitching.
Yes, I agree. It could be possible, and we would have liked to have collected some. Retrospectively, we did go and collect some data on, prices of certain stitching garments and all, but I don't have the results yet.
Have you explored the heterogeneity of the effect according to the distance to the training center? Because you could expect a larger effect for women that are far from the training center, because this competition effect is low.
But the training center per se won't matter, right? The training center per se is just a centralized location. Yeah. So training center, no, there is no effect in terms of the training center effect. Only essentially comes through in the program completion. If they are 30-minute walk from the training center, they are unlikely to complete the program.
Then they work from home probably.
Yeah.
Given that they are far, the ones that are far, they are facing less.
Far from where?
From the training center.
But the training center per se doesn't matter, right? Because it's a question of whether they have all things close to their house, right?
Yes, but maybe I got something wrong. But this graph is your first graph is that all the women that live 5-minute walk from the center, they go and finish. So you have around the center. You're going to have a lot of women that are training.
Okay, I understand. No, if I remember correctly, we've done there was no effect. There was no effect. We did, within 15-minute walk, within 12-minute walk, and after, we did various cuts. And no, so the impacts were not differentiated by distance. So, sorry, I didn't understand your, so.
Find them dropping out.
We find them dropping out, yes. But then for those who, that's the offering the treatment or both in terms of TOT, the problem is that the power goes down a lot, because the numbers go down quite a bit. If you already have just about 298 women who complete the program, and then you are cutting it out in terms of where they live, how far they are from the training center, the numbers, the sample sizes go down a lot. So but yes, we did done that, and we don't find any impact based on how far they are from the training center in terms of the labor market outcomes. No, yes.
So in some sense, you've pre-screened on people who are sort of willing to pay 300 rupees and also are educated if they pass 5th grade, so they're likely to succeed anyway. So what's the general applicability of this? So would you think in a general population a vocational training scheme would succeed?
First of all, the 300 rupees is, when we talk to everybody, nobody seemed to say this 300 rupees was the big barrier. We listed the reasons why they dropped out. We talked to a lot of, because I talked briefly about this experiment that we did. We also, for the experiment for a kind of sister paper, we also had a set of non-applicants coming in to participate in these experiments. And we asked them, why didn't you not apply for the program? And nobody thought of this, nobody said this 50 rupees per month deposit was the main barrier. So lots of other barriers. So, as to why, we don't have the time, etc., and so on. But that was never a barrier. As opposed to whether, women, we have restricted to women who had some schooling. We didn't have I can't answer what would happen if it was open to everybody, because we were constrained by the requirement, by what the NGOs wanted. They said that, look, for those who don't even have 5 years of schooling, I've talked to a lot of the women who came in, even with 5 years of schooling, they don't know the basic arithmetic, because as a part of these experiments, we wanted them to do some basic sums, just to get their abilities, to get a measure of their ability in these. Even they pretty bad at that. So, and the point that both NGOs raised was that, look, these women who have had 5 years of schooling are barely going to be able to get all the measurements right, because ultimately you need to write down the measurements, make maybe multiply small things. It's going to be absolutely useless if you don't have this requirement. So I can't say, as maybe for women with low education, maybe this is not the vocational training. So maybe we need to think of some other kinds of training for the women with less than 5 years of schooling. Maybe some
Sample in terms of level of education. You said secondary education is a very significant effect.
Yes, so I have some numbers in the paper. It's no, it's about 50%. It's not very different. So about 50% have more than secondary schooling. 50% have, at least in the sample. So
you make a difference between 5 years and secondary completion.
yeah.
Make a difference.
Yeah, but then it does make a difference. But then in the sample, the distribution is 50-50. So yeah.
To move back to the policy question, if you were a significant policy position, say at the state or city level, what would you do?
I would first of all try and have programs which have a local access. This is the one thing that you have to minimize the amount of time. If you want to target women, you have to minimize the amount of travel time. If you have a program where you need to take a bus or the metro or something else to go somewhere else to work, it's not going to work. Even a 30-minute walk to complete the program is not working, right? So you really need to be very careful in designing programs, and the issue of local access, I think, is very important. That graph just bothers me so much. This is a 30-minute walk, you're not going anywhere outside, you're pretty much in your neighborhood, and still there's this drop.
on that issue of distance, what it's conceivable that the returns weren't available until after they had completed their training, and so information about what the returns would be was not available. So given that, that it would be interesting to have a follow-up to this and give some thought to the question of providing some information on the returns from the previous round.
Yeah.
But the other question I wanted to ask is, I don't know, what is the market for this kind of service, either from NGOs or from private providers? And so is this a unique thing, or is it already provided in the market to some extent, or by the government?
So the first question, so I agree. I think the next thing, if we ever go back to doing this, is we will use this experiment to provide information on, here are some examples of how much you can earn, and see whether that information is quite feasible that a lot of these women don't have information on what are the returns. You're spending quite a bit of time. It's free in terms of monetary, it's 50 rupees per month and you get back 350 rupees. But you're still spending 2 hours a day for 5 days a week over a 6-month period, and you have many other things at home to do for these women. So it is a commitment, a big commitment. So they might not be willing to make this commitment without really knowing what the returns are. I fully agree with that. And the fact that a lot of the women did it is quite very encouraging in my opinion. But the next thing, I fully agree, the next experiment, if we want to ever go back, we would provide them this information from this survey and say, look, here is an example. About your second problem, I don't know. I don't know. Why is it that the NGOs, this NGO that we worked with, Satya, has been doing this on a very small scale for quite a few years. But there are some government courses, government schemes, government programs that are being introduced. But again, it's not as local. People have to work, have to go quite a bit to these schools. So is that what you mean?
One of the things is that the returns tend to filter out, right? So it would be really interesting to find out if the women who have gotten employed have gotten onto the subcontracting chain. Otherwise,
I agree. Yeah.
Unstable demand, and there is a jump because they've learned something new, and they're using that. So you go to the local market household, which demand is not stable. And the women who did enroll, it would be interesting to find out if they knew about the subcontracting chain and the others didn't.
Yeah.
Because that's your stable employment. That's when the family's behavior starts changing towards the woman who's now a working woman.
I agree. The other thing that we are seeing, and what we're trying to do is kind of measure. So it's not, there is an effect within the household in terms of the amount they save, because they are actually saving quite a bit of money by not buying clothes from outside for their kids or for their family members and so on. So there is a lot of saving that is going on. So that's a related. No, that's not a. I agree. But
It's
that.
not a replicable
Yeah,
model.
I agree.
And certainly not scalable.
Yes. As to.
That's when
So.
the issue of distance has been found for girls' education as well.
Yeah.
Another big.
Yeah.
So that's not surprising.
Yeah.
But the increase in earnings is surprising. So the question is it stable?
It's stable over from 6 to 18 months. That's all I can say. I agree. That's in the future.
I have two suggestions.
Yeah.
So one is, of course, straightforward. To address Sheeta's point, you should look at the heterogeneity in earnings by initial education.
We don't find any. We've done that. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the other point might be that the way in which education or just initial skills might have a role to play is that if you think about like someone who has no other skills, just organizational skills or general skills then they might just have a job where they have to cut a piece of cloth 1,000 times, and that's basically what they've got out of this program. Whereas someone who has better education, more general skills, they can become their scope of work might be much larger. They're responsible for the whole garment, or they also have like entrepreneurial or managerial tasks that they're assigned with, So it might be interesting to see a broader scope of, what their responsibilities are and what tasks they undertake, apart from just earnings. So those were my 2 suggestions.
So quick question. I presume disproportionate number, most of them were married. These women.
Not all. No. I have
What
these
was the
numbers.
proportion?
I have it in my table somewhere. So, so here, 33% were married.
Only 33, even in that age group.
Even that group, yeah.
Because I've not done any research on it, but talking to a lot of NGOs and all, the 2 sorts of most popular vocational training schemes that people keep talking about, and there's seems to be a demand, at least in North India, are stitching
And beauty parlor.
Beauty parlor.
Yeah. We that came out. We asked them. We did a pre-survey to ask them what kind of, and this was the first choice for most.
And for the
second
idea
choice
was that the younger unmarried ones seems the beauty parlor.
No,
was
but then
seems
I think there was a selection here. As I said in the selection paper, women who are unmarried are much more likely to apply for this program. So maybe they kind of internalize the fact that they're going to have children. It's going to be harder to get childcare. But even there, this childcare, even for the married, the childcare thing becomes important. So, and just to answer your question about 44% was 45%. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So related comment about scaling up, I think this particular training program caters to the textile industry, where the problems of availability of labor is known to be acute, especially of tailors and cutters and so on. There's also the seasonal industry. So I think when you're talking about scaling up, looking at this demand supply thing, I think someone raised it in the beginning, industry specific effects would be important. Also related to the stability question about seasonal industry and so on.
No, agree. So this is, as I said, it's very specific to this particular program. So I'm not saying this is the way out for all women or even in other parts of North India. Maybe, this is, in a sense, a start, right? Ideally, maybe one has to give, for example, in the Columbia case, what Athanasio and others did was they could enroll in a number of different courses. People can choose which of the courses they could enroll in. But they had a huge sample. It was a government-sponsored program. So, and then that's how they see the effects, right? The participants could choose. Here, this is a much smaller program. We just focused on this kind of skill on these women, and many more things to be done. I don't think even in this context we have answered all we're nowhere near to answering all the questions.
So some of this is going to echo with what Dilip already said, but I think that what we're picking up here is an effect of a bundled treatment. Like you have provided them treatment, but you've also provided this treatment in a group. They came to this center, so it's not clear whether, and you don't have an assessment of at baseline what their skills were and at end line what the skills are. So we can't tease that. So it seems to me there is also the possibility that their social capital was going up, or they were networking and learning about the returns from the groups. So down the road, if you want, you might want to flesh that out a little bit.
Yeah.
That, it's possible that these people are just learning about opportunities to work or returns to work in these areas from other people in their groups.
Yeah,
and
so
not so much
I can't
how to
rule any
stage
of them. So as I said, through the behavior, we try to rule out some of these things, not all. We would have loved to, for example, seen what has happened to their time preference and all of these things. But I agree. But as I said, this is just an experiment, a start. Yeah.
So just along those same lines, maybe would it be possible in order to pin down the channel as an increase in skill to just I don't know how much it would cost, but to commission from all of your sample a certain standardized piece of product, like a stitching product, and just to rate the quality of that product later?
Yeah, we already have that. We already have that, right? So yes, yeah.
So in terms of the fiscal sustainability of this program, might be interesting to consider bundling it with a microcredit program where they can pay back.
Yeah.
So the question, I mean, this is still, it's a huge subsidy here, right? But in terms of scaling up, particularly even for the NGOs
Yeah.
and so on, right?
Yeah.
So if you are considering a
Yeah. That we have been considering that, and we have been talking to other people and saying.
Here it's a buy-in. It really matters how the NGOs connect to the local community. You don't have that effect and it's not possible. But if at all this program has to be replicated, you need to know how the NGOs effectiveness in a sense.
Yeah, that's always the case, right? But no, the microcredit program we have talked quite a bit. Few things, some of the few designs that we have in mind, in case we ever want to go back. And one is giving them information. One is giving them kind of cost of transportation, like giving them a voucher to buy tickets, metro tickets if it's in Delhi or in other cities. Would that have an effect? Microcredit is something that we have definitely talked about, because the next step would require some form of capital maybe. Here we are kind of assuming that they don't require this capital. They can just buying a sewing machine is a starting point, and maybe this is really in a small scale. So the next to make the leap, the next step, we need something more. I agree, no question. Yeah, Alok.
Do you have a sense of what the size of the subsidy that you provided was? I'm trying to get a sense of. Yeah, sure. I'm trying to get a sense of why it is that, say, a medium-scale stitching firm wouldn't provide this kind of thing for a fee, right? So how much would it cost?
So, as I said, in our case, the cost was 1,800 rupees per person, per woman.
That's the cost center incurred.
The center incurred, both the fixed cost and the variable. Fixed cost means the rent, the teacher salaries and so on. The variable cost was all of these costs taken together. So the teacher salaries, the rent cost, the materials for the training purposes. We had to buy some sewing machines for the training courses, etc. All taken together per woman, it was 1,800 rupees. So not a big amount of money. So and even with these fairly conservative estimates of returns, it's cost recovery in less than 2 years. So I agree with you that this is why is it that other firms are not coming in, number one, and why aren't women actively seeking out? That is related often to this issue of local access, I think.
I guess the policy question is, right, is it a shortage of capital at the level of the firms? Do they not see? I mean, that's the other side, right? We're talking about the labor supply side of the issue.
And what about the labor demand side?
Yeah, what about the labor demand side? Why are they not providing these skills? They can charge for them. There are other mechanisms. Wages can go up over time.
Yeah.
Right?
There's one more person on this side.
Yeah. Sonia?
Yeah, just two small points. One about this point you emphasize about distance to the travel center. I think it's important to try and establish whether that's the opportunity cost of time or a safety consideration. So I wondered what time the classes were run. Were they evening classes?
No, they were during, you could have class in the morning, afternoon, evening.
So do you think it wasn't the opportunity cost?
No, we looked at, whether that, the graphs, it's not identical, the slopes changes a little bit, but it's no different in terms of, if you stratify it by the time of the class. So I thought exactly the same thing, that, evening classes, women are more, more unwilling to go out and walk for 30 minutes. We tried that. That's the first thing that came into mind. But it was not, that was not what was driving. It was the distance overall.
So it could be the opportunity cost of time. We don't know. And so my other question is related to time as well. In assessing the returns, you showed us changes in employment that were substantial relative to the base rates, but on their own not so large. And the mean increase in hours was about 2.4. Was that conditional on working, so eliminating the zeros?
No, this was a lot of zeros. I have the numbers, I can tell you.
That was per week?
Yeah,
So if it includes the zeros, that's big.
This, yeah, it is a lot of, it includes, everything includes the zeros. I have the numbers on conditional increase in hours. I can tell you later what they are. And they are obviously for the women who participate, it's much bigger. Yeah, so. Okay, thank you.